We have four speakers today, and a stakeholder invited speaker. So I will present them as we proceed. So the program of today starts with Franck. Franck is a partner in GEroNIMO project working on the ethical and societal impact of technological innovations in breeding. Rasmus is also working on the same topic from a different perspective in RUMIGEN project. And Jarkko and Amer will share their perspective, the stakeholder perspectives on ruminant farming from HoloRuminant project. Marie-José is joining us from GEroNIMO, and she will share her ideas with us today. And then we will have an open discussion. So feel free to ask your questions either in the chat box or just raise your hand and open your camera. The house rules, please mute when you're not speaking. And if you have any questions or comments, you can use the chat box. And when we are in the panel discussion part, please raise your hand. If you have questions for a specific speaker, please write it in the chat box. So maybe if we have time right after the presentation, we can address it. Otherwise, we can discuss it during the panel discussion. As I said, we will be recording the session. So Ecogen is a collaborative research cluster led by HoloRuminant in partnership with 4 other projects, livestock, 3D Omics, RUMIGEN, and GEroNIMO. And it is focusing on the main objective of all these projects, which is creating sustainable practices in animal production. So I want to introduce also EFAP very shortly. As EFAP, we are the European Forum of Farm Animal Breeders, and we also hold the Secretariat of FABRE-TP. We have the private sector actors about animal breeding and reproduction services, and also the research institutes and academia. And we are trying to initiate or engage in dialogue with policymakers and other relevant stakeholders, try to support and promote the responsible animal breeding through Code EFABAR, and research and innovation and the strategic agendas for that, and also advocating for proportionate and science-based policy and legislation. So we have 3 different groups under EFAP, RepVet, QualiVets, and AIVets. You can find more information on the website, and we are partnered with quite a number of international and European organizations working on the same objectives. We have the Code of Good Conduct called Code EFABAR, Code of Good Practice. Maybe it's better to rephrase. So it is working. We are working on a balanced and responsible combination of many different traits, and our members are committed to Code EFABAR principles. And it is not just the traits, but it is also responsible use of the technologies as well. And from here you can, I'm switching to a QR code where you can all scan and reach out to other related projects as well as Ecogen projects. So now I give the floor to Franck.
Thank you so much, Ella. I will try to share my presentation. So that's me, Franck Meijboom, and here you see a little bit more working at Utrecht University as a shareholder in Sustainable Animal Stewardship and head of the Center for Sustainable Animal Stewardship, which is a collaboration between the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine of Utrecht University and the Animal Sciences of Wageningen University. Next to the GEroNIMO project that is also linked to this meeting, I also show you the logo of the BOVREC project is also a Horizon 2020 project, which is linked to this field, which we finished earlier, but part of what I will share with you is also based on that project. And what I do in these 15 minutes is not so much to go into detail of the ethical issues related to animal breeding innovations, but much more on the whole reason first why the importance for this field of societal and ethical issues is important, and more importantly, why stakeholder and public participation is what I would say not so much a kind of add-on which you decide to do, but which I think is a kind of inherent part of the whole field of doing animal breeding innovation. And to start with that, I will ask you a question. You do not have to answer because it comes with all kind of practical issues. But I would ask you, if you look at this picture, do you immediately see what you're looking at? And maybe if you are an expert, you'll recognize, or maybe you have a have some familiarity with it, but it is a zoom of this, which is quite an expensive watch. The reason why I show this is that in science we quite often focus on very specific details in order to know more about the mechanisms behind something, and that's of course important, but a lot of the questions is not only in this case, what do you see, but also what do you want to see? We would like to know, in this case, the background of the watch, to know the time, or in this case, even to know the date. But how you do that, or in what kind of way, you could say, well, this is a very classical, traditional way of watch. And maybe you say, well, my preference is much more like this, with the now also turning into classical Casio digital watch, or you say, well, I'm more into smart watches, which I also use not only for looking at the time, but monitoring my my lifestyle, my health. So why do I show you? Because, and this is a picture from one of the fact sheets from the GEroNIMO project, where you see that at that time 400 pigs were genotyped and phenotyped. We show in a very well dense way, and for experts clear way, what we are doing, and also showing to a certain extent the amount of work. But it is for most of us not involved in animal breeding, a little bit of that first picture I showed you. And that's no problem, because we need these fields of, in this case, biology, data science, et cetera, to understand and to make all these innovations possible. At the same time, and then I stick to the GEroNIMO project, the reason why we look at the background of breeding, genetics, further innovations, is because we aim to achieve certain goals. So as you here see, we are confronted with certain environmental constraints linked to climate change. We would like to promote efficient resource use. At the same time, we value health and welfare of animals, and within the GEroNIMO project, we formulated as one of the aims to preserve genetic diversity. This is as such not so much the background of the watch. This is also why we think it's important and valuable to look at animal breeding in the first place. And even if we say, well, okay, well, we agree on each of these goals, I think already about these goals you can have discussions how to operationalize those. So whether that should be the traditional watch or whether it should be the smartwatch, is also something which pops up in the discussion of animal breeding, because what is preserving genetic diversity? Is that to look at the nice Celtic pigs we met during the last General Assembly meeting we had for the GEroNIMO meeting, or the picture you see to the right. So why public engagement? Well, for at least these three reasons: because breeding is always directed, you breed for a certain goal, and it's not neutral. The technology as such is never neutral. The way you use it, the way who is in control, who is in power, who has the responsibility, how to deal with the things you do not know yet, so the uncertainty. That's not only about facts, that's also about weighing interest, weighing values, and especially in this case, animals, I would say different to plants. I mean, of course, also we have discussions about the value of plants, but especially if you see society, there is a change in the value of animals that are no longer seen as just instruments for us, just things. You could question whether they have been seen in that way completely, but still, in all kinds of legislation, you see that animals become entities that have a certain moral status in their own right. So what your aim is, what technology you use, the way you value animals is embedded in a societal context. At the same time, you could say, well, why bother with public? Because, and maybe you could say we are lucky in that, there is not a fierce public debate. So if you look back at the early 2000s, where and the end of the 1990s, where there has been strong discussions about GM food, maybe you recall that, Frankenstein food, and in the slipstream of that, also discussions about GM animals. At this moment, it's relatively quiet, so there is no strong protest. Sometimes it's a little bit linked to animal testing, but in general, there is not a lot of attention to innovations in breeding. However, I would say that the reason that there is not that type of protest or severe public debate is not a reason to say, well, okay, lucky for us, we can continue anyway. There is still a need for public input. And the interesting thing, and it was also the reason to choose my title, as if you play in an empty stadium, especially during the COVID period, we played a lot of games in empty stadiums, and a lot of us complained about that. It was, well, that was not the real thing. Yeah, so playing football or playing baseball. Without any audience, well, you're still doing the same game, but it's not the same fun. And the interesting thing, or as my claim, is that in science we do a lot of playing the game in an empty stadium. And you could say, well, that's possible, but I think for both science but also the link with society, sorry, it's important to look for public engagement. For at least these two arguments, if you look at discussions on responsible innovation, public engagement really is put forward as something which is an essential element. And the other element is that if you have discussions within the technical sphere among experts only, then you run the risk of having your own, let's say, bubble, but also remain into your own dominant perspective. So you do not have a lot of new insights, critical insight that not only is a kind of emergency brake, so to say, well, we shouldn't do this, but also not to open up the debate and maybe accelerate innovation. So the other point, the need for public and maybe broader stakeholder engagement, is that if you look at how many stakeholders are involved in breeding, it's really important to bring them together. And there are, of course, a lot of initiatives, which shows the EFAP as already one as well, to bring different steps within the field together. But another point is that innovation as such is no linear process. Yeah, so stakeholders is not only something where you can say somewhere at the end we need them. it's really important to have them present from the very start. And it could be in terms of a kind of co-creation, so working together to be aware of the broader set of values and interests next to those directly involved in breeding, and maybe also from a very strategic perspective, also to prevent that you do not have these ethical and societal debates only at the end of the pipeline. So when most of the work is done, it's luckily changing for the good, but especially in previously performed EU projects, quite often the work package on the ethical and societal dimensions was framed at the very end. So you have all the normal, let's say, work packages, and then you have the final one, because that's also to a certain extent framed as seen, well, you do all your real important, and then as a kind of add-on, you'll look at what kind of problems in terms of acceptance will pop up. Well, especially with stakeholder and public engagement, you can show that that partly doesn't work, but it's also something that doesn't accelerate innovation. And animal breeding, I already showed, is also related to the future of farming, and that is not something that is to a small set of either scientists or small set of stakeholders, but that is closely related to all kind of broader societal issues in terms of social planning, structural planning, but also how to deal with broader issues of how to deal with climate change, with views on animals, etc. So reaching out to stakeholder and general public can have different aims, and this is not a full list of all possibilities, but you could say it's important to gain insight, so to know what others think about a certain innovation of technology, or just to add on, to invite them to reflect and discuss, so to more enable them to enter the discussion, or one step further, really to participate, so to work together towards a joint process of innovation. So that's one of the reasons within Work Package 5 to have these elements of ethical challenges, societal challenges, and scientific knowledge in a more integrated way, and not only had that idea of societal ethical issues as a separate pillar, but more included in the other elements of the work packages as well. At the same time, because what I tell is not that novel, you can say, why is it not still common sense? Well, partly because it's not that easy. Reaching out to general public is problematic here. Is one, to come up with new facts, ideas about how breeding look like, sometimes confront with certain frames in society, or people who simply claim that although you have done your PhD and work for many years, say, well, you're wrong. So reaching out to general public is not something you do on an afternoon. On the other hand, I think this is also an important point. To be engaged is important. At the same time, there's sometimes a thin line in having, as you see here, a nice picture about political science and politicized science, to have your own position as a scientist or a stakeholder within the societal debate. Still, I think it is possible. And one of the important starting points is what I would say a two-way public engagement, and to invite lay people, general public, to form their own views. And that could be starting from complete different views than you have, but at least to provide them and give them a voice in the discussion, also to involve them in innovation processes in breeding organizations, companies, to make the whole field more responsive and accountable. One example of this is what we have done in the GEroNIMO project, where in 2023 we performed focus group discussions in 4 countries, and these countries were selected because these are partners in the GEroNIMO project, but also because they, to a certain extent, represent, of course, different fields, places in Europe, but also different languages, different traditions to a certain extent in agriculture, and also a kind of hypothesis that probably also a little bit different in the way they perceive and value technology. So we have had extensive discussions with them on human-animal relationship, on future farming, and then finally also on genetic technologies in animal agriculture. I won't go into the details of the results now. I would be happy to do that in another situation or other moment, and we will publish the results later this year. But it's at least one way of involving people into discussion, inviting them to provide their views on, in this case, genetic technologies and especially gene editing. And as a spin-off, we did something similar on a small basis with children and their parents at the Weekends of Science at Utrecht University, and on a more general level at my Center for Sustainable Animal Stewardship. We have an annual animal dialogue with over 100 participants, not only on innovations in animal breeding, but a much broader range of topics, not so much to solve problems or to convince people, but to open up a dialogue. And the interesting thing is that it attracts a lot of people, and a lot of people also tended to become more engaged and open for each other's perspective and arguments, and really help to build new perspective for the future. One of the reasons that I included the BOVREC logo also to this is another way of engaging and improving engagement is the Demos game that was developed by Dr. Donald Bruce and Professor Anne Bruce in the BOVREC project, where we focused on cattle genomics, which is a way of, by way of gaming, a card game, opening up discussion among as broad as possible audience that would like to play the game. Again, with knowledge cards providing information, so it's not the idea that it's just evidence free, but at the same time also inviting people to come up with their views, but also to engage to perspectives and arguments that are considered to be relevant in this context of reading innovation. So that's another way of coming up with ways to engage audience. It could be stakeholders, but especially also for the general public. So as a conclusion, I think that it is important to improve and engage with stakeholders and the public. There is no, I would say, one size fits all. I think within this session we will find and hear ideas and proposals for different matters as well. But I think it's important to see this more than just providing information. So it's not the idea that there is a kind of knowledge deficit. People do not understand what we're doing, so we are trying to explain it once again. It's important, as I said, engaging with general public or stakeholders and more general. It's important that it is not evidence-free. So yes, it's good to provide information, but we should do much more. And especially the interaction, and interaction is real discussion among openness towards each other's perspective is essential. And I think it should start in an awareness that dealing with the societal ethical dimensions related to breeding is a joint responsibility. That implies two parts. So one is that we need others, stakeholders in general, and the general public more specifically, we need them. So it's also a responsibility that lay with society to deal with it. It's not just us. And on the other hand, because it's a joint responsibility, society also has a responsibility. So you could not say, well, you choose to start breeding animals, so you should deal with all the ethics that relates to that. So it's something where both sides of the field have, I think, a responsibility to deal with it. So these two elements, so the no one size fits all and the joint responsibility, I think, should be the two starting points. That brings me to my acknowledgements for the GEroNIMO project, where we did it, still doing that in Work Package 5. And you see at the same time that not only the work in the Work Package teams, but also framing and doing public engagement is also team science and teamwork. All right. Thank you. Give the word to Chala. I think you're muted.
Yeah, I was just talking. Thank you for your presentation. If there are questions, please write it in the chat box so we can bring it up when we'll go to the panel discussion. Now I would like to give the floor to Rasmus so that we can hear a similar kind of research path from RUMIGEN side with a different approach. Rasmus?
Thank you very much. And I think it dovetails nicely with what Frank just said. So I'll just share my screen here, jump to my presentation. I hope that works for everyone. Otherwise, I'm sure you'll let me know. So yeah, hi everyone. My name is Rasmus Mikkelsen. I am the team lead for the food transition program at a not-for-profit foundation called Democracy X. And so just to give you an idea of who I am and where I come from, Democracy X is a foundation that works with democratic tools to help society through challenging transitions. So for my part and for my team's part, what we work with is, of course, a food transition to a food system that can exist within the planetary boundaries going forward, right? I am also an ethicist by training. So I am not a geneticist. I'm not even a natural scientist. But my work has been in sort of empirical ethics alongside projects like RUMIGEN. And I'm sure many of you will know what RUMIGEN is, but I will just say a few words to give you some context for what I'm talking about here. So RUMIGEN is a project that aims to develop sustainable, socially acceptable breeding programs that balance efficiency, resilience, and genetic diversity in ruminants. Right. So the high level idea is to get a more comprehensive understanding of the genetic basis of certain traits like heat tolerance, and integrate new sources of data and tools into breeding programs. Then there's also this component on assessing sort of the viability and risk and opportunity of genome editing in this area as well. But for our sake, what we do at Democracy X, together with the other partners in the work package we are working in, is to understand the social acceptability of breeding technologies and breeding programs. So so the question is not so much yes or no, but rather we sort of ask this broader question, which is what are the features that define whether an advanced breeding technology or program in livestock are acceptable to the public and under what conditions? So the important thing here is not just whether it's acceptable, but whether what features define that room of acceptability. And that gets me nicely to why we've called it a room of acceptance. The idea is that we create, it's a method we've developed for this project together with our partners in Wageningen. And the idea is we create this room of acceptance. So it's a multidimensional space that is defined by a range of dimensions on societal values that we then assign thresholds to. So that's maybe a little confusing, but what it essentially is we try and identify the range of dimensions that are likely to define whether a specific implementation of a technology is acceptable. So that is the map of what are the areas of concern. Then within those dimensions, one by one, we try and put a boundary of sort of what level can you go to here before you are likely to run into rejection or controversy. In some cases, you find very hard boundaries. In some cases, you find soft boundaries. But in any case, we try and bound each dimension. And the idea is we end up with this map that you see here, which if a breeding program or the implementation of it, so it's not just a program or the technology itself, but its implementation in practice stays within the boundaries that are drawn on this map, then the hypothesis is that we should expect it to find broad public acceptance. Whereas if it strays outside the room of acceptance on certain parameters or dimensions, we should expect to run into either rejection or controversy in those specific areas. So that's sort of the idea, that we create this generalizable tool and method that can be used to create these rooms of acceptance and then apply them to specific technologies to understand what the likely acceptance is. So how do we do that in practice? Well, it's sort of broadly a three-step process. So what we first did was we did some desk study to do an initial mapping of the relevant dimensions. And then we did a broader stakeholder engagement throughout the value chain. The idea of that was to quality assure the dimensions we've already established, and to get the extreme positions in each dimension. So to understand what is sort of the limits of acceptability in each direction. With that, we designed a series of scenarios together with our partners in France at Allianz that were sort of stereotypical, or you might say sort of caricatures of future societal sort of views of future societies based on different decisions you might make about technological innovation and implementation. Sort of in practice, we might have a scenario that's a very pastoral scenario where we imagine we have a very, very restrictive regulation of both R&D and implementation of new technologies, and a return to much more sort of small scale idealized vision of an agricultural system. Whereas we might at the other extreme have a case of a very, very centralized system. So you have very large farms in practice, very large corporations owning them, a very sort of pro-innovation regulation. And the idea is not to suggest that any of these futures are likely or are direct consequences of specific choices, but rather that they bring forward some of those issues, some of those value considerations that you might have when you discuss what is otherwise very, very high-tech scenarios that are difficult for citizens to engage with on a sort of technical plane or as pure information. But if you can give them these pictures of a future, it's easier to get at those value discussions. And what we then do with those scenarios is we bring them to the citizens. And the way we do that in RUMIGEN is we use a platform we've developed here at Democracy X called Engage Suite, which allows us to run this deliberation framework called Europe Say. The idea is that we don't poll participants. It's a a reflective way of gathering considered views and also polling deliberation specifically. So we ask people to act as hosts and invite friends and family into their homes. And then we, via this online platform, facilitate a room where they have discussions around these scenarios. The idea is that we want people to deliberate rather than, so it's not a discussion about rejection or acceptance, it's about what values are at play. If you feel sort of a rejection attitude to a specific question, what's driving that? What are the concerns that are driving you to that position? That's much more interesting to us than a yes or a no. So we carried out the citizen engagement in 9 European countries. In 2024 and a little bit into 2025, we engaged around 771 citizens. So it's not a huge number, but again, it's a very deep discussion over several hours in a room with several people. So we get very, very deep data and rich data, but not this very, very wide representative sample. And so what do we find when we take this approach? Well, we find that broad acceptance of even what we traditionally see in sort of the survey approach. We see technologies reach quite a high level of rejection, whereas in our data, we find that we don't find the same result as sort of broadly. Because the main concern often becomes not yes or no, but under what conditions. So implementation must consider sustainability. We see that moves a lot in the rejection attitudes, whether sustainability is addressed in an implementation. We see animal welfare take up a lot of room. And then we see this issue of transparency and control being very important to citizens. So again, that links up to, for example, when you sometimes see quite high rejection rates in survey results of, for example, sort of what to citizens is the pool of genetic editing, which encompasses a lot of technologies and a lot of uses of them. But when you see a high rejection when that term is attached, often what our data indicates is that there might be an underlying issue or perception that there's a low level of transparency and that there's that those technologies are controlled by very centralized actors, and that some of what is driving that rejection is not the technology in itself. So we should be careful to pin it to the technology rather than a specific context or implementation. Concerns we see is concerns around unnaturalness, so that's partly an aesthetic concern, and these playing God narratives, which I think is interesting because I don't think you see a lot of that in the sort of academic literature. You see some discussion of the playing God issue, but you don't see a lot of proponents of that actual position that there's a significant issue in terms of playing God. But apparently amongst the citizens, we actually do find that. Then there's a big concern about long-term and unknown risks. So risk mitigation becomes really important if you're a technology developer. And distrust in institutions. Sorry, I just have to get my notes here. And distrust in institutions and private ownership. So which marries nicely with other data showing that if you have a high degree of trust in your public body's ability to regulate a sector, then you also have a more positive view of the potential upside of the technologies being developed, right? That fits nicely. I think sort of key takeaways that are important here is that values drive acceptance more than technical understanding. So working with technology developers or in that sort of value chain, I often find that the point of view that it's not useful, and I think Franck's talk also sort of touched on this, that information is not enough, but also technical understanding isn't necessary for getting good points of view and useful data out of citizens. And also just providing them with more information doesn't move the needle. This idea that if just they understood what we want to do and how this actually works, we wouldn't see this resistance. That is not what we find. We find that there are legitimate differences in values. And citizens are experts in that, even if they're not experts in breeding technology. Additionally, as I said at the beginning, acceptance is conditional. It's not binary. So again, as Franck said, interaction is essential. Your acceptance doesn't hinge on in levels of information or specific conditions being met in the abstract. Rather, it depends on your ability to, as a pipeline that develops technology and innovations, to engage with the public and to understand what those conditions for acceptance are. So it's not yes or no, it's under these conditions. And I think what should be the takeaway from that is that innovation should be designed with value alignment in mind. And of course, I would argue that you should use the room of acceptance to do that. That's probably not surprising to you. And then that you should engage the public early, not just at the end. So what we find is that deliberation generally lowered both negative and positive views, right? So in our data, when we poll early in the deliberation, we see more sort of more extreme views on a lot of technologies, whereas our post-deliberation, we see a merging in the middle. So that might tell us something about a consensus being available to us if we're willing to engage in an honest deliberative practice. So not just, as Franck said, not just informing the public, but engaging in a meaningful deliberation. And it also moves the needle. So we see in our data swing about 24% in either direction, but about 24% move their position on an issue post-deliberation. So public engagement should shape and not chase innovation pathways. And when Franck says that public acceptance is a joint responsibility, I completely agree with that. I also think it's a way to provide value and to sort of ensure the value of your innovation pipeline. We need to develop solutions that are societally desired in order to have the level of impact we would like to have out of our research and innovation. The way we do that is understanding what those values are. That is also the way we ensure that the innovation choices we make and the early design choices that lock us into technological pathways are aligned with those views, so we end up with useful, meaningful technology development. And I'll sort of end on saying that I think that's a general note that should be that I think is a main point of the work I do often, is to get this idea across that we spend too much time in the labs considering what we can do as technology developers, and too little time considering what we want to do with those technologies. If we can get those two things closer together, we can have more impact with our research, and we can be better at delivering the solutions that are actually desired by the society we live in, which after all probably is the main point of the work we're doing, right? So with that, I will thank you for your attention and give the word back to Challa.
Thank you, Rasmus. In fact, your last slide is, I think, really a very good slide to start a discussion, but let's wait for the panel discussion. Thank you, and I would like to give the floor to Jarkko and Amer now for sharing the stakeholder perspectives on ruminant farming from HoloRuminant.
Okay, thank you. So, my name is Jarkko, and I'm a research professor at Natural Resources Institute of Finland. And together with my colleague Amer, I will talk about the work that we have been carrying out in HoloRuminant project. And first, I will talk about stakeholder perspectives from the perspective of farmers, and then Amer will talk about consumer work that we have carried out. So the next slide, please. Yeah. Before going into the topic, I would like to also mention that that in HoloRuminant we have a thing called stakeholder platform. So if you are interested in being involved in the stakeholder groups and stakeholder discussions that we are carrying out within the HoloRuminant project, please go to the website of HoloRuminant, and then you can find there a button called Join HoloRuminant as a stakeholder, and then you can subscribe to our list. Okay, let's go forward. So, as I said, I will talk about focus group discussions that we carried out with farmers and experts in 4 different European countries. And this is joint work with Edel and Jacques as well. Okay, next one, please. Yeah, so as you know, the research is, science is progressing quite rapidly, and scientists are developing new ways that utilize microbiomes to improve animal health and welfare and to mitigate environmental impacts. And in HoloRuminant, we are looking at, HoloRuminant as a project is looking at microbiomes and different aspects related to that. And we are involved in a small socioeconomic work package, where we have carried out focus group discussions. And even if we have a better understanding about the role of microbes and microbiomes in animal production, it's not enough to stimulate good innovations and research results to be adopted by farms. So we also need to understand that what are the factors that make farmers and other key actors to adopt different innovations that science is providing and delivering, and what are the critical factors that are influencing their willingness and interest and intentions to adopt different measures. So with that in mind, we have carried out focus group discussions in order to collect stakeholders' perspectives, expectations, and views about practices to manage microbial ecosystems, and then also the willingness to accept proposed innovations. And the next slide, please. So we carried out focus group discussions in 4 European countries that are partners in the project. And in the focus group discussions, we covered 4 different themes. First, we explored how the farmers and advisors, so the participants were mostly farmers and farm advisors, although there were also some other experts. So we looked at we examined how they identify microbiomes on farms, what they know about microbiomes, and then what are their opinions about the roles of microbiomes in production, health, and greenhouse gas emissions. And then finally, we asked their opinions about innovations relating to early life management, dietary transition, and environmental issues. We also carried out a European level policy maker focus group. Next slide, please. So here you can see a couple of photos from 2 of the focus groups, but let's go to the next slide. So one of the things that was quite evident based on the focus groups was that the experts really recognized the importance of early establishment of good microbiome. So they understood that that having like the right mix and right microbes present in the barn and in the animals, especially in young animals, that can be a valuable asset in order to produce successfully milk and calves. And of course, these microbiomes are affecting throughout the life of the production cycle of the animals, from birth until production and all the stages in between. In the next slide, we have some messages or like findings or conclusions. So if you want to encourage adoption of new innovations that science is providing and delivering, there's evidence that the practice that is affordable and has a positive effect on production parameters such as milk yields or growth rates, farmers' workload, environmental parameters perhaps as well, and especially to animal health indicators, and also if there are positive impacts on quality and safety of the products, they can have like a good. They are in a good position to become adopted on the farms. But then what is also important is that there's a demonstrated applicability and efficacy of the measures in local contexts. So this local aspect is very important, especially for farmers. And this relates partly to practical issues that they are facing in terms of organization or managing the farm or farming practices and farming processes. And also local specificities of the farms. And then another thing that is important is that farmers' behavior is also influenced by the level of knowledge, skills, and perceived usefulness of the practices. So farmers' attitudes and perceptions and intentions, they can be shaped by capacity building, provision of adequate training, and provision of information about the usefulness of the practices. And in the next slide, you can see some of the measures that we were discussing in the focus group discussions, and they are ordered in the order of from the least acceptable or recommendable on top to the most recommendable according to the participants of the focus groups. So what you can notice is that, for instance, those that were that the participants were most willing to recommend to be adopted by other farmers included, for instance, sanitary-related practices, that kind of practices which are most likely having a clear positive impact on productivity and production, perhaps having economic impacts. Whereas then the practices that they were least willing to recommend to other farmers were related, for instance, to early life management practices, for which they thought that there might be some challenges in terms of economics, or that the effects in terms of productivity were perhaps not so evident, although they recognize that there are positive signals on those. So it depends also on the type of practice, whether farmers would recommend certain practices to be adopted by others. And now I will give the floor to Amer.
Thank you, Jarkko. So my name is Amer, and I am an agricultural economist working in UK in Finland. So in HoloRuminant, so the focus is not only on farmers. So we also wanted to understand how the general public or the consumers view this microbiome interventions, and to explore this research questions. So we conducted a survey which helped us to see how people or consumers react to different interventions. And also we try to understand what factors maybe shape the acceptance or the support for these different interventions. So as I said, so we conducted a survey. So our survey design had two main parts. So the first part looked at how consumers see the different microbiome interventions, and the second part focused more on their attitude and the factors that shape those views. So we had, as you can see in this table, we had 7 different interventions or microbiome measures. So the first interventions are associated with the health and the welfare of the calves, and then we have three other interventions that are more linked to environmental issues, so which involve the use of feed additives that aim to reduce emission. And the second part of the survey included more than 30 items or questions or variables that aim to reflect consumers' attitudes in terms of different aspects, from familiarity with the farming system, animal welfare, environmental awareness, and so on. And of course, the survey also included a part about socio-economic or socio-demographic characteristics. So the data was collected in July 23, yes, in 4 EU countries. So we have Finland, France, Ireland, and Poland, generating a total sample of 3,200 something responses. It is, as you can see here at the bottom of this table, it's around 800 observations for each country. So now let's see quickly and briefly the result on the acceptance of these different interventions. But before that, just here, there is an example of the question that we asked. So we simply asked the people to evaluate these different interventions on a 5-point scale from strongly agree to strongly disagree. We also gave them the opportunity or the option to answer I don't know. So let's start with the global overview. So here we have the acceptance of the 7 interventions for all participants. So here we have a pooled sample. We put everything together, and we see that keeping calves with the mothers is the most widely accepted intervention, with almost around 80% of the participants expressing agreement and strong agreement about the implementation of this measure. And as you can see, the last one in the bottom that involved the use of chemical additive was the least favored intervention, where around 50% of the respondents either disagreed or strongly disagreed with this intervention. Now let's see the intervention just quickly one by one and compare maybe the acceptance level between the countries. So here we have using colostrum, and even if this intervention is widely accepted, we see that in Finland it received maybe higher support compared to the other countries. And here we have providing probiotics to calf as powder, maybe some differences between Finland with maybe higher support, and France, where the acceptance is a little bit lower. Then we have providing probiotics in the form of yogurt, seems to be similar to the previous one. Then we have keeping calves with their mothers, with again higher acceptance levels in Finland. And then for the feed additives, so we have adding algae or seaweed extract. They seem to be similar between the country, the result. And then we have adding plant-based oil or fat. Maybe we see a little bit lower acceptance in France. And then the last interventions with that involve the use of chemical additive. And here we see that so here, as we said at the beginning, there is low level acceptance, but not big differences between the countries. Okay, so then to have a better understanding of, let's say, the acceptance dynamics, so it will be interesting to see how some factors, some relevant factors, for example, people or consumers' attitude, preference, socioeconomic characteristics are associated or affect the acceptance of this intervention. So for this, we just done an OLS regression analysis where the acceptance of the interventions is explained by a set of potential influencing variables. And here we have the results. So we try to build different attitude variables. This is what you see at the top of the table, this 5. So we have familiarity with the farming system, food safety, environmental awareness, animal welfare, and so on. We have also some socio-demographic information. But to keep it simple, so instead of a long table, I try to put the main result and show them in the next figure. So here we have the different interventions with the bars showing the different influencing factors. So the length of each bar show maybe the size of the association with the acceptance, and most of them, they are significant, statistically significant. So as you can see, different factors are linked in different ways with each intervention. So later I will share the full paper, so where the results are discussed in more detail. But I just wanted to highlight, especially one important finding here is this red or orange red bar that is labeled information. So when we were designing the survey, we thought that the public may be not that familiar with this type of intervention. So we thought about playing with different level of informations. And also this also is something that is very relevant in shaping public acceptance, and can be very relevant for different stakeholders, policymakers, businesses who plan communication or targeted marketing strategy. So how we did that? So in fact, when we were collecting the data, so we divided our sample into groups. So when asking them to evaluate the intervention, we provided the first group, I would say, a kind of brief information about the intervention. And now for the second group, so in addition to this brief information already provided, we also added more details about the intervention. So it's kind of, it's short, but we try to be we try to share with them kind of holistic evaluation of the intervention, showing its potential effect on animal health, food safety, environment, and so on. Now let's come back to the result just quickly. So we have introduced this information level as a dummy variable, and it is significant across all the interventions. And so what it is interesting is that across all the models except one model, so the provision of more information had a negative influence on the consumer's decision. So this may appear surprising at first, but it is not that unexpected, because when we consider previous research, this is something that was already reported. This adverse impact that was already reported in previous research. And the argument here is very simple, is that when people are exposed to more information, they tend to become more critical. So I said the impact is negative except one intervention, which is the last one, which is the use of chemical additives. So in this case, we observe that the group who received more information tend to be more accepting this intervention, the use of feed additive, compared to the group that received less information. So I will stop here. So yeah, so this is so if you want more detail about the study, because don't have that much of time and space to share everything. So in this full paper, there is information about the data collection, the different assumption, the different explanation and interpretation of the result. So this paper cover only the intervention linked to calf health and welfare. We are still working on the other intervention, but yeah, so I will stop here, and thanks for the attention.
Thank you, Amer. It was and Jarkko, quite interesting presentations. So now we could move to the panel part, and maybe Marie-José can share her ideas about the presentations and maybe have some questions already.
Okay, so good afternoon. First of all, thank you for inviting me and giving my view. I've been working for about 20 years at IFIP, the French Institute for Pig and Pork Production, and I've been working with both with breeding companies, but also with breeders of local pig breeds. However, today I can only give my view because for some of the topics I'm unable to know if people have established positions, for example, on new breeding techniques and so on. I have personally no idea, so this is only my view. In GEroNIMO, I'm work package leader of a work package which is dedicated to the study of genetic and epigenetic diversity, focusing on local breeds. And well, to react to the very nice presentation that were done today, in fact, it was very interesting, and I really agree with the fact that each actor brings its own values, its expectation, its fears, and it's really important to try to have public engagement. But moreover, I would say, as mentioned Franck, but moreover, I would say a global engagement. I think it's also very important to engage the farmers themselves, as was done in the work of in the presentation done by Rasmus. I think it's very important, and that's the spirit of the survey we organized in GEroNIMO, targeting the pig and chicken breeders of local breeds and all people involved in the preservation of these breeds. And because we wanted to give them the opportunity to express their view, to describe their production systems, and also to describe what they were interested in, what were their expectations. Because in fact, when I first read the call when we were preparing GEroNIMO, I read that we were invited to propose selection schemes for local breeds, for example. And in fact, I said, I don't even know if they are interested in or not. So I think this was the first point to ask them. And despite I was working with local breeders for some years, in fact, I was a bit surprised by some of the responses we collected. And first of all, I was surprised to see that most of the people involved in local breed preservation were in favor of selection. And this was something I didn't expect, in fact. And I was also surprised by the fact that they were mainly interested in genetically improving production traits. So because of my surprise, this makes me think two things, in fact. First, that I probably had some preconceived ideas, even I was working with people for many years, but maybe I gave too much weight to what a few influential people had previously said, and also probably that these same people might have changed their position. So in fact, I would like to invite the previous speaker to give me their opinion, because this raises question about, first of all, the representativeness of the answer we collected in all our activities, and how can we ensure that a few strong voices do not dominate the debate, for example, and also what tools could we use to measure how perceptions evolve over time. And because I'm convinced that maybe today it's even, well, people can evolve very rapidly depending on what's on social media, or I don't know. So what's your opinion about that? Because it's a bit difficult to consider that the answer we collect are will still be valid within a few years or a few months.
Any of our speakers would like to comment?
Yeah, I thought that was a very interesting question. So I wanted to, because of course there's a danger of I have to sort of condition this on, this is mostly my hunch from working on this rather than me having any sort of representative data to support it. But my sense is that it's a question about what we're sampling. I actually think people's underlying values are fairly stable over time. But if we keep sampling sort of what is your immediate knee-jerk position on a topic today, then you get fairly low information, fairly low consideration, and you get an answer that's very much dependent on sort of what was in the news last night, right? Was there some report of a pig transport with heat stress or something, right? And so I think it's also a question about doing our job well and understanding if we can get at the underlying values and understand what's driving those positions. Then we can get more stability in that, and we can perhaps get a better picture of what are the things and topics we should engage with. What's important to explain, or what's important to consider when we design interventions or programs. And so when you say we get representative data, I think surveys run out, sort of have an expiry date that's quite quick. I think deliberation, and as I said, also as we see in our data, post-deliberation, when you talk about those entrenched views, very loud voices on the edge, what we see in our data is when we do the deliberation, people move towards the middle. People are consensus seeking. So again, if we can engage them, if we can get to those values and we can engage them in a deliberation, then I think we do ourselves a favor in not sort of overcorrecting depending on whatever the last survey has shown us, right?
Yes, but then, well, it's difficult to engage so many people in this kind of deliberation. So how can we move beyond small samples and scale it up to reach the larger population, in fact? What kind of means do we have?
Yeah, I don't. If anybody else wants to jump in, please do. But I would like to use an example here from Denmark in sort of the use of sort of genetic technology. I use those very broad terms because in my experiences in the public sphere, those terms all mean the same. So if we are to talk in the public sphere, we need to understand that while we see all these divisions, they don't necessarily exist in the public discourse. But you all know of Novo Nordisk today, a very large pharmaceutical company that produces diabetes medicine, which has some level of genetic editing in the production of the yeast. That was very controversial in Denmark. But what Novo Nordisk did was they took it very seriously, and they showed up at every news segment in every newspaper and took the deliberative approach, took a nuanced approach to say, we want to discuss this. And because it was a controversial topic, what they succeeded in was stimulating a broader public debate. It got that attention. Because they were willing to engage, it didn't become an entrenched discussion, because it seems like we choose between deliberation or attention, right? If you want attention, you need sort of trench warfare. But here they succeeded in getting attention and having a deliberation that I think succeeded in on the sort of medicine side, Denmark coming up with a very sort of recent regulatory position on the use of those technologies, which we, of course, didn't see with the larger GMO debate across Europe, right? Where I think no matter your position on it, I don't think anybody thinks that the process or the current regulation is very adapted to to the actual real world, right?
But that makes me wonder, because it is a little bit like conflicting with what Amer said about when the consumer or when the public or the survey, the people know more about one topic, the level of information is a little bit opposite to the like acceptance rate. Did I get it right, or maybe am I
No, that's right. So we have 7 different interventions. So for 6 of them, so people that received more information about these interventions, they tend to accept less than the people that received less. So people with more information, they receive less. They accept less. So why? The one argument, or the first argument that we can present here, is that when people they are exposed to more information, they tend to become more critical, and they analyze more, and then they tend to maybe reject more this intervention. So this is the idea. And as I said, this is not that surprising, because this was reported a lot for other previous research. Yeah.
And maybe to follow up on that, sometimes providing more information makes things more complicated, especially if you're not familiar with the topic, so you might become more confused. And then in this specific case, the one intervention where providing more information actually was associated with increased acceptance of the measure. It also originally had very low level of acceptance, so there was also much room for change.
Yeah, it depends also on the baseline, right? It depends also on the baseline, because that one that had a positive impact, it was the least accepted or the least reported. So, it was maybe easier to build trust and among those people. Yeah.
Can I ask you, so you say higher level of information, but what does that information look like? What do we mean by information here? So as I said, with our scenarios, the focus, because we perceive that certain values are underlying people's perception of specific technologies, we in some cases think it's more important to tell you something about, for example, how will it change the landscape? Or how will it change your local farmer who lives down the street? Will he be able to stay independent, or will he become like those sorts of issues? If they're driving people's perception of technology, then what does information look like in this case?
So you mean what does it look like in our case?
Yeah, so when you say you give people more information, does that mean explaining sort of technically how a specific solution might work in the animal or something similar? Or is it what is that information?
So in our case, this is an online survey, right? So we need to be short and precise, so we don't make the life complicated for the panel. So basically, the information that we provided is that, for example, there is one intervention, the use of chemical additive to reduce emission. So we explain what the evidence tell us in terms of the impact on the milk and the meat in this. So food safety, the impact on the health and animal welfare, also environmental impact, and some cost information. So the information that we provided, it is not that big. So it's just short information, but it is more information compared to the control group this is not if I understand well, you had this platform maybe where you had interaction. So in our case, we were not able to have interaction. So just short brief information about the interventions.
Yeah, certainly, and we have the same issue, but I just think it's an important point that sort of the provision. There's a choice in what information you provide.
Yeah.
That is I think is can have a very big swing on that data, and it's very sort of, there's almost a step before that is determining what is relevant information, and that sort of presumes you already know the answer to how it's going to move the needle.
You
right?
are right. I mean, it's not only the type of information, even the way that you frame the information is important. So in our case, I understand people criticized us because the way that we framed the information, but there are so many ways to do it. So we did it in one way. We try to be as objective as possible. Also, try to align with the objective of the project. Yeah, but you are right. So the amount of information, the type of information, also the way that you frame the information is very important. Yes.
Yeah, based on your comment, I would have really liked to see if we did another round with the control group that didn't have any information at the beginning, how would they respond after seeing the information? That because this wasn't like that. You had two groups of people, right? The control group, which is different than the group with the information.
Yes.
Okay, nice. Anything else from Franck or any other? Everybody can just join the discussion.
There's another point I wanted to mention. In fact, we have seen the interest of public engagement during this the previous presentations, and I was thinking that it was in fact not only public engagement that would be from the very first steps that was said. I think that it would be interesting to find a way to engage people, to have a global engagement already at the stage when the calls for research projects are written. And I think this is not something easy to do, but because I have the feeling that now the content of the different calls, it comes from up to down, and it would be also interesting to collect the means from the down to the top, and to associate the research to the topic that really are important for the public, of course, but also for the breeders. I think for the farmers, I think it's also important to ask them what do they need from research.
Yeah, but I think we also see a lot of shift in the call texts now compared to, like, let's say 5-10 years ago, that they are, of course, they are based on farm to fork strategies or other policies of the European Commission. So I think it also tries to include, of course, the societal perception, but then the societal perception is very heterogeneous in Europe. As we saw also from both Franck's and Rasmus' presentations, we have geographical differences, cultural differences, belief differences everywhere. So yeah, it is difficult to find a balance, but I agree with your comment that these should be also taken into account during the preparation of the call texts. Yeah. Franck, do you have any?
I think go on. Please go on.
Yeah, I think that was actually quite important comment, and sometimes it happens that in projects we have let's say so-called biological research, and then we have other research or socioeconomic research, and then they tend to live a bit in isolation, and sometimes it happens that socioeconomic aspects are looked at only at the very end of the project, and I don't think that that's actually very useful or fruitful approach. I think that it's better to have these different elements of research going side by side throughout the project, and that way they can be each other's. I was involved in another project which ended last year, where we had this type of approach, and I think it was really useful, and what information and insights that we were able to collect from different stakeholder groups, they were also feeding into other parts of the project and vice versa. So I think this kind of more integrated approach towards biological and socioeconomic research that would be and integrating stakeholders throughout the process, starting all the way from the preparation of the projects and even proposals and goals. I think that would be quite a useful approach.
It's a nice point, and the interesting thing that it's asking for a different kind of infrastructure, because if you look at biomedical research, there is much more of a tradition in terms of patient organizations who are involved also in call text writing, but there you have a still broad but more targeted group which you can ask and address also at a kind of professional level, who understand what it is to be involved in this kind of formal process, where here it's that broad. Of course, at the farmer side, you could say, well, you have farmer unions who you may try to involve, but especially at the level of general public, then already you have the classical discussion, do we address them as consumers or as citizens? As citizens, we normally say, well, that's politics, because we choose our politicians, so we are already represented. So that there is, although it's I think a very important point, but quite difficult in a way to achieve this. But I think it is indeed important to have that as early as possible included.
And can I just add, Frank, because you say we elect our politicians, I think, to me at least, it's very, having a competitive democracy every 4 years is not democracy enough to address the issues of setting such a broad research agenda across so many areas. So I think actually the EU is doing really well at this, at least comparatively to many national governments. And I do know the EU does do some citizen engagement in designing, for example, when they designed the new Horizon program, we assisted them with some parts of it. So I know it is happening.
Yeah.
And I think, but again, it's a deliberative approach, right? You don't, a competitive democratic process is, I would argue, a bad tool for the job of designing research agendas. So we need some democratic innovation there.
Yeah, and then you come back to your point earlier about representation, because also here it's clear that the democratic process we have now is at least a kind of mismatch. But what would we want at the same time? Just to invite, even though it's a fair representation of different perspectives, then you could still say what is the justification to invite, let's say, these 50 people all over Europe to represent the general public. At the same time, I would say if it is about including a broad set of perspectives, that should be enough, or could be at least enough. So it should not necessarily be a representation in the sense that, well, this is a fair representation of the Dutch society or the German society, but at least that you could open up the discussion and say, well, although mainstream is very risk-benefit framing, whereas you find out that there are a lot of other arguments used in public debate that should be included, or certain views on the future of livestock farming. So I think that's maybe even more important, to have that included in the process than whether it is the representation of a certain group.
Yeah, but I think that coming to on the topic of genetic innovation, I think that the end users are the farmers, in fact, and they will be directly impacted. In fact, they will be considered as responsible for what they produce later by the general public. So I think it's important to involve them.
Yep,
that's for sure. But I think at the very end, closing the discussion, I think it all depends also on providing neutral and unbiased information to public, to the end users, so that they can actually make informed choices and decisions. I think we are just on time, so I would like to thank all of you for joining us today in the 5th episode of Ecogen webinars, and hope to see everybody who are also already still here on the 6th one next month. So have a nice day, and thank you very much.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Have a
You're
nice
welcome.
day.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.